So in the last module we looked at CMSs, and the one before that we looked at CSS, and the one before that we looked at HTML. This module gives us a chance to go back and reflect a little bit about those and kind of apply what we've learned and throw in a little tiny smidge, just a taste of PHP while we're at it. What we're going to be doing is designing a theme for WordPress. Why WordPress and not Drupal, since we approached both last time? Again, WordPress is a simplified CMS, and so theming for it is marginally simpler than it is for Drupal. Especially once you throw in some of the modules like views and panels, it can get a little hairy in terms of figuring out what template you're in and how to apply that template with Drupal. And so we're starting with WordPress, which nonetheless will give us the foundation if we wanted to go then beyond that and do a Drupal theme. So what we learn here will be applicable to theming other kinds of CMSs. And why a redesign? Well, a redesign, I'm actually going to be redesigning my own blog, which is a bit selfish, but it will work. And it's because it already exists, so we're doing a redesign. And we're doing, in this case, a redesign from WordPress to WordPress. In many cases, you might be designing from something else to a CMS like WordPress or Drupal. But here we have an existing site, and we want to move it to a new design. This is actually a fairly common design task. It's not uncommon that people will come to you and say, you know, here's an organization. We obviously have a website because we're an organization, and most organizations have websites, but we want something new. We want to represent ourselves to the world in a certain way. And in many cases they say, you know, this is what we like about our site. We definitely want to keep these things. Here are the things we don't like about our site, and we're hoping you can change. Even in those cases where you're approaching a new organization or a new website for an existing organization, they probably have something in mind. You can at least hope that they have something in mind and they're not coming to you completely blank. In many cases, they might come to you in just the opposite position, which is, I like this site, please clone it. And in that case, it's kind of your responsibility to explain to them not only the issues of copyright in doing that, but also that that's just bad communication practice, that you want to differentiate yourself by creating something that is clearly representative of your organization and not the organization that you want to steal a site from. Nonetheless, when they do that, you can at least see what is it about that site that they like, what is it that is appealing to them, and what is it that they want to throw out. So that's what we're going to be doing with me. I'm my own client in this case, and in this first lesson we're going to talk a little bit about process and the different ways that people go about theming, and the way that I'm going to do it in these lessons during this module. And let's start by taking a quick look at my existing blog. This blog has been around for some number of years now. It's gone through at least 8 redesigns, and the back end has been WordPress for many, many years now. Before that it was Movable Type, and before that it was a CMS that I had written myself in Perl, and before that it was a static set of pages that I updated in HTML each time. And so it's had a long life, but in the latest incarnation I really pulled it back to bare minimums. So you see that there's a little a menu up here with a few choice pages. You'll see that it's a single column design all the way down, and we have a small footer, but that's about it. There are some things I'd like to save about this. I don't have to stick with the colors. I'm not even too attached to this particular font. It's fine, but I'm okay with a different type there. I do like this particular element, and I now associate it with my blog, both in terms of the shortcut and the image here. So I'd like to retain this image. There's some content here that I want to maintain, which is the several years of blogging. The contact page used to have something else here where it was a contact form, and I'd like to bring that back. I also have a bunch of research and teaching sections that I'd like to add to this as static pages. So I want to kind of keep that in mind as I go forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a theme for this. And now to come back, if I were talking to a client about this, you know, there's a couple of paths we could take. Traditionally, when designers started to become interested in the web, when it became not just geeks, but This actually started mostly when both the Mosaic browser came forward and allowed you to have graphical elements on a page on the web, and also when it became commercialized. Both those things led to designers becoming interested. And the earliest designs were people going into Photoshop or whatever and creating a full page graphic that would then download in your page. And that's kind of the traditional worst possible case of a designer who had designed for, designers who had been used to a physical medium saying, I can create for the web. Here's an 800 pixel wide GIF that you can just load into the page, and all the graphics, all the typography, everything was right there in a single graph. So that marks one extreme end. The other extreme end is pure HTML with no design elements at all. In practice, we're somewhere in between. However, there is still that traditional divide between the kind of coders who now work mostly on the back end piece of it and the designers who often design in Photoshop and may not be able to implement or only have the basic idea of implementing. There's still not a lot of cross-training, especially in large organizations and design shops. And so there's a traditional process, which usually means prototyping in Photoshop at a basic level, sometimes wireframes, sometimes even earlier than wireframes, once the wireframes are happy, once the client's happy with the wireframes, fleshing it out and coming out with a graphical comp. Once the graphic comps are done, taking that and prototyping in HTML. Once the HTML is done, taking that HTML prototype and making it into a theme. This is a lot of steps, and actually it's reflective more of work process than it is of what makes the most sense. And also it's reflective of expertise. That's changing a little bit now. A lot of designers are fairly code savvy, and a lot of coders are becoming more designerly. And so more and more you're seeing people design in the browser or design in code. And so they'll prototype the site directly in code. In many cases, again, they're prototyping to a basic HTML, CSS page, and then from there taking it over and cutting it over to the CMS. For me, and for a number of other people, it makes sense just to design directly into the CMS. There's that why add the extra step of creating an HTML page that you then have to kind of sort the pieces in that make it part of the CMS. So for this process, I'm going to be working directly from back of the napkin sorts of sketches and kind of implementing that directly in a bare bones theme and building it up within the theme itself. This would be easy enough to do behind sort of a wall. You put up a password wall while you're building it. In this case, I'm actually going to leave it up on the live web, which we would never really do. But I'm going to do it in this case because although I do have a fairly large amount of traffic, I'll just put up blog posts telling people what I'm doing along the way. So, for example, this video will go up as the first blog post to let people know why my blog looks weird. So I've got these kind of sketches. This is a very rough sketch. Admittedly, this is the bad part of it. In my head, I have some ideas for the way I want it to look, and because I'm an individual doing it for myself, that's okay. I would have a much larger design document if I were working with a team or working for a client. But since I'm my own client, I have an idea both of the rough pieces, and some of the little detail pieces that I'll want to do for polish later on. But I'll kind of work through that serially. So what's the process here? Well, I'm going to start with content. This is kind of like when you're making a sculpture, you start with the clay. I'm going to start with content, or with the rock. I'm going to start with the content. I'm going to rough it out in terms of the layout. Then I'll look at typography a bit and look at making sure that this is a blog, so it's heavily type dependent. Make sure that the type looks right. Then I'll look at the graphical elements and make sure all the graphics work well together. Then I'll kind of come back out and look at debugging and maybe a little bit of optimization for search engines, and then I'll be done. And so that's kind of the process that we're going from the very broad to narrower and narrower pieces. At each level, we'll look at broad cuts and then looking at the details within those broad cuts at each step.